Today, we're diving into the dramatic birth of a nation. We're going back to the 18th century, a time when the land we now call Nepal was basically a fractured puzzle of warring kingdoms. We're going to uncover how one ambitious leader looked at all this chaos, not as a problem, but as the perfect opportunity to forge a brand new empire right there in the shadow of the Himalayas.
And I mean that literally. It just didn't exist. What did exist was this patchwork of dozens of small competing territories. And right at its heart, you had the Kathmandu Valley, the wealthiest, most culturally important prize in the entire region. But here's the catch. Its incredible riches were matched only by its incredibly dangerous division.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the deep-seated rivalries that were tearing the Central Valley apart. Then we'll meet the visionary leader who had a plan to unite it all. We'll follow his incredibly ambitious military campaign, see the exact moment a new nation was born, and finally, we'll explore the powerful legacy he left behind.
Okay, so let's really set the stage here. The Kathmandu Valley was, without a doubt, the cultural and economic heart of the whole region. But it was anything but united. And that disunity, well, that was its greatest weakness. You know, what's so fascinating here is how this table just lays out the complete dysfunction. The once great Malla dynasty, which had ruled a united valley, had completely splintered into these three city-states, Kathmandu, Patan, and Bhadgaon. And for more than 150 years, they were just consumed by, as one source puts it, hatred and jealousy. They were constantly fighting over trade routes, over prestige, you name it. In Patan, things were so unstable that these powerful ministers, these so-called kingmakers, were basically running the show, just propping up puppet rulers they could control. And in Kathmandu, the royal court was just a snake pit of conspiracies. All this endless infighting made every single one of them incredibly vulnerable.
And that vulnerability was a massive problem, because some really powerful forces were closing in. I mean, look to the south. You've got the British East India Company, which was just gobbling up territory in India. Then all around the valley, you had dozens of smaller hill states, all fighting for their own piece of the pie. And on top of all that, everyone was competing for control of those super profitable trade routes to Tibet. The valley was a prize, and it was just waiting for someone to claim it.
So into this chaotic and, frankly, dangerous environment steps a leader from a small, kind of obscure kingdom called Gorkha. And he saw all the rivalries in the valley not just as a weakness, but as a golden opportunity to build something totally new. And this is the man at the very center of our story, Prithvi Narayan Shah. When he becomes king of Gorkha in 1743, he has this incredibly clear vision. He could see that if all these small states didn't get their act together and unite, they were all going to be swallowed up by bigger powers, especially the British. So his solution? It was as brutal as it was simple. Conquer them all and forge them into one single powerful kingdom.
And this quote right here, it tells you everything you need to know about his strategic mind. This guy wasn't just a conqueror, he was a geopolitical chess player. He knew that his future nation would be, as he put it, sandwiched between two absolute giants. His entire unification project, really, was driven by this urgent need to create a buffer state, one that was strong enough to stay independent.
Now, having a grand vision is one thing, but actually making it happen, that's something else entirely. Prithvi Narayan Shah's dream of a unified Nepal had to be built through decades of relentless and often brutal military campaigning.
This timeline here is basically a masterclass in strategy. This wasn't some quick all-out assault. No, this was a slow, methodical strangulation of the valley that took a full 25 years. First, he grabs Nuwakot, which is the main way in. Then he takes Makawampur to the south, which cuts off their trade and supplies. You see what he's doing? He's slowly encircling the Malla kingdoms, weakening them bit by bit until they were finally ripe for the taking.
And that number, 2, it's so important for understanding his character. It stands for the 2 failed attempts his father made to capture that first key prize, Nuwakot. So where his predecessor had failed twice, Prithvi Narayan Shah learned from those mistakes, regrouped, and then he succeeded. It just shows you, this was a guy who was never discouraged by failure.
But, you know, the campaign definitely had its dark chapters. The battle for Kantipur was especially brutal, and during the fight, his own brother lost an eye. Now, historical accounts, including some from Christian missionaries who were there at the time, they describe a really harsh retribution. In his rage, Prithvi Narayan Shah is said to have ordered severe punishments for the town's defenders. It's a part of the story that really complicates that simple narrative of a heroic unifier, right? But the climax of the whole campaign? Well, it was a stroke of absolute strategic genius. The takeover of Kathmandu, the most powerful of the three cities, was almost bloodless. Prithvi Narayan Shah timed his attack perfectly. He marched his troops right into the city while the king and pretty much everyone else were completely distracted by this massive religious festival, Indra Jatra. His army basically just walked in and took the throne before anyone even knew what was going on.
So, with the fall of Kathmandu and then Patan and Bhaktapur right after, the era of the Malla city-states was officially over, and in its place stood a new, centralized power, the unified Gorkha kingdom, which was the very foundation of modern Nepal.
I mean, just look at this slide. It really captures the sheer scale of the transformation. Before 1769, you've got these fractured states, constant war, total vulnerability. After 1769, you have a single, unified kingdom. All that infighting was replaced by a centralized state that could finally stand on its own 2 feet against outside threats. This wasn't just a conquest. It was the creation of a whole new political reality.
But conquering the valley wasn't the end of the story, not by a long shot. The actions of Prithvi Narayan Shah set the course for Nepal's entire future, and his legacy is still shaping the country to this very day.
At the end of the day, his legacy wasn't just about conquering land. It was about building a nation. By pulling all these territories together, he created a country that was strong enough to resist being colonized by the British, a fate that befell so much of the rest of the subcontinent. He also started a process of cultural unification, establishing his own Gorkhali dialect as the common language, which would eventually become modern Nepali. He effectively dragged Nepal out of a medieval age of feuding lords and into the modern era of the nation-state.
And his vision for this new nation is just so beautifully captured in this quote. He didn't see his kingdom as some place where everyone had to be the same. He saw it as a diverse garden where all these different groups could coexist and flourish together under one rule. This idea of unity in diversity was a core principle of the nation he was trying to build.
And that kind of leaves us with a final thought to chew on. The story of Nepal's unification is one of incredible ambition, brilliant strategy, and, yes, brutal conflict. It's the story of how one man's vision, forged over 2.5 centuries ago, laid the very foundation for a modern nation's identity, an identity that to this day is still being debated, celebrated, and reckoned with.